Hello and welcome to another episode of the Embodied Union podcast. I'm Lindsay.
I am Charlie.
And today we're going to be talking about healthy vulnerability in relationship and just our experience with that and our maybe like a version from the masculine and the feminine and giving it some different context, I think, to maybe what you've heard before. So what's our journey with it? What's your journey with vulnerability in relationship?
So before I even understood what vulnerability was or responsibility was, or before I'd really started to work on becoming more conscious in relationship, I was just an emotional storm. And I would bring that to my partner because I didn't know how to hold it myself. And I really wanted my partner to fix it, save me, soothe me. I know we speak about that all the time, but that really was my experience of I wouldn't even have used the language of vulnerability. It's just I was an emotional storm and I would project it everywhere and I would make it my partner's responsibility because I couldn't hold it.
Yeah.
And then in those relationships, they couldn't hold it either. So that vulnerability, which isn't really vulnerability, it's projection, would cause a lot of breakdown in my relationships. So that's kind of where I started. What about you?
I think for me was I didn't know how to be emotionally vulnerable in relationship. So I would kind of bottle it up and try and be self-reliant and pretend like I didn't have needs or I didn't know how to really share what I wanted to say because I was so fearful of getting it wrong or being a burden that I just really struggled with it. I would someone would know something is up, but I wouldn't say anything. I would actually in particular even deny that it was happening.
Do you think you would deny it because you didn't even have awareness of it, or is it because you felt like shame around it?
Both. So when it was a blind spot, I wouldn't know how to acknowledge it.
You don't even know.
Exactly. Someone would be like, hey, are you like, what's up? And I'd be like, I'm fine.
Oh.
You know, so it's that kind of scenario of like completely, and like yourself, just completely unaware.
I think that's a really, I really resonate with that. I'll say as a woman, I feel like part of a superpower that the feminine has is being very sensitive and aware of the subtle energetics of what's happening for herself, but also for what's happening around her. Maybe you can just call it hypervigilance because of trauma, but just like sensitivity. And so often I would feel if my partner had shifted into a mood or something was wrong, and then that starts to trigger my own anxiety, and then I would bring that question like, are you okay? Not really sure how to invite like a collaborative like exploration of what's going on, like self-revealing. It's just like, what's up? And then if it's met with, I'm fine, it's like I would then shut down. It feels like the other is shut down. And like that's really the opposite of vulnerability in relationship. I think some couples are sharing so much with each other and they think that they're doing the good communication. And then there are some couples that just aren't sharing at all because they don't know how, but like both are two kind of extremes on the spectrum and neither are really in service to the relationship.
Yeah.
Like the oversharing, the emotional dumping and projection, and then the shutting down and withdrawing and not knowing how to bring it forward.
Exactly. And it's kind of like, unhealthy ends of the spectrum on both ends, you know, and this is why today talking about it in a way that's like, how healthy vulnerability looks, knowing that there is an element of self-responsibility in relationship that we need to have around what we share and how we share it. I think that's really important. It's like how we're sharing our vulnerability is also important because otherwise we can be emotionally dysregulated and then share. And I think in my case, that's what used to happen for me. I would get to the point of overwhelm, or I would then feel safe enough to share, and then I would almost overshare, or I'd do it at a time where it felt really bad for the other person to receive it. It was like at a key point or a key time or at an event or when they're about to go and do something, and I would share then right at the point where it was like going to be received the worst, you know, and then that would create a story for me that when I share, it's a problem. And it's like, no, me sharing is totally fine. It's when I'm sharing. So it's not received poorly.
Well, that's like we always speak into how important it is to set up your sharing powerfully by always asking your partner for permission, whether they can hold the space and having them really check in, like, do I actually have capacity? Am I a bit triggered? Am I a bit tired? Am I a bit busy? And like giving permission to say no if you really can't hold space because you want it to go well.
Yeah.
You want it to go well.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Healthy vulnerability in relationship is also knowing where you can and can't hold it. And that's healthy. It's healthy to say, no, I can't hold that right now, but this is when I can. You know, if I'm saying no to you about something, it's like, I'm a no now, but I'm open tonight. You know, once I've finished work, or say in our case, we take a little bit of time apart just to make sure that we're both able to actually share it and to hold each other. Because often at times when one person is being vulnerable, it kind of invites vulnerability for the other person too.
If the way they are being vulnerable is like true responsible vulnerability, it can invoke the others like leaning in.
Yes.
But if we think, I think there's a bit of a misconception around emotional dumping and that just being, I'm just being vulnerable. Like I'm actually just being vulnerable. I'm just sharing. I'm just telling you how I feel and you can't hold it. And like, to me, vulnerability is less about emotional projection and more about taking responsibility for how you are feeling, how it's your own stuff, and revealing that to your partner. So it's like, instead of me saying, you've done this thing wrong and I'm upset and that's just me, I'm just being vulnerable, Lindsay. I'm like, oh, I noticed when you did that thing, what it triggered in me is my fear of abandonment. And that's really alive right now. And I'd love for you to help me like unpack it, or maybe I need some reassurance. It's like, that is actually more vulnerable than just like blind projection and emotional, like just having your emotional storm.
Yeah, big time. And I think that is so important that the listeners know that. It's like, you sharing with ownership is going to be so much more received and understood and taken on. Whereas if we play the vulnerability as projection or as blame, it's vulnerable for me to share all these things that you did wrong. That is not vulnerability. And I think that's what people do. It's like, oh, I really want to tell my partner how much they piss me off or upset
me. Just being vulnerable.
Yeah, I'm just sharing. You can't seem to hold what I want to share with you. It's like, yeah, because you're not taking any responsibility for your projection in that share. So, you know, this is a big piece here, because the way that I kind of see it in my work with men's work is that men misunderstand vulnerability with their partner as emotional vulnerability. Oh, I want you to be more available. I want to see and feel your emotions more in our relationship. And so men take that on as, oh, I just need to share my emotions with my partner more. And typically that works out to end up becoming like unsafe for their female partner. It's like, oh, my man's really emotional all the time. And the feedback I get from women is, I don't want him to be like that. I don't mind if he comes occasionally to do stuff, to share big stuff with me, but if he's crying every couple of days to me, it's not attractive.
I think there's been a real pendulum swing, right, from men not being allowed to be emotional and being quite stoic. And then now there's lots of like, men need to be more vulnerable, and the pendulum has swung now. And some men are really like allowing, because we all have masculine and feminine energy. It's not one is, we have one, but they're allowing that part of them, that emotional part, to like take center stage. And as you're saying, if something really big like happened in your life and you came to me and you had tears or you had some overwhelm, like I would be able to hold that and I'd have compassion for you. But that doesn't happen really ever or very often, you know, and it definitely feels better for me that you're actually holding your stuff. And when you do come to me and you are self-revealing and you are being vulnerable, again, it's not this emotional storm that you're bringing to me. You're actually holding yourself and you're letting me in on what's going on for you. You're being honest with me, but you're still not, you're not drowning. I don't feel like I have to save you. So there's just, I think, yeah, there's such a fine line between the emotional like dumping and drowning yourself. Like you're drowning yourself and then your partner's kind of drowning with you, and being like, I'm being vulnerable because I'm letting you in, but I'm actually still holding this. And that's why such a big part of the work that we do is teaching men and women and ourselves being in the practice of self-regulation.
Yeah.
Because when I want to come and share you what's going on for me, I really enjoy it now. I never used to be able to do this. I've usually gone through my own line of inquiry of like, what's my trigger? What have I made this mean? What core belief is activated? Like, who am I with this? Who am I without this? Like, is there another perspective? And when we come to self-reveal, we're actually like, this is what I've just uncovered about myself or what happened between us. It's not just this, I'm in overwhelm, like make it better. It's like, this is what I've looked into. What do you think? And we kind of are detectives to our own stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because I think often at times couples that don't have the skills, when their partner is still dysregulated, they're trying to fix it or they're trying to support the other. And typically what I find is when we're flooded or triggered, someone's talked about it recently where it's like, you don't share your wounds, you share your scars or your scabs. So it's kind of like you've gone away, say, if you've been triggered and you've done a line of inquiry, you've come back and you've actually looked at it in a bunch of ways. If you were still deep in it, in whatever trigger it is, me trying to offer suggestions or support you is like not even the right time. It's not helpful.
It actually doesn't land, you know, like if and we have this experience, like if I'm really flooded and you're like, well, let's look at it from this angle, I'm just like, reject, wrong, and I get more frustrated at you. And it's just like, it actually serves us for me to go and like flex my muscle of regulation, because then I'm actually open to looking at it with you.
Yes, big time. And what I say in that is like, that's the technical term in a way is social engagement system is online. Like you actually, your nervous system feels safe enough to receive something potentially new and is open. Whereas if we're in fight or flight, we're in overwhelm, nothing's going in. We're not learning at that point.
We're in survival.
Exactly.
So it's like there's no curiosity. We can't. There's like learning capacity is switched off. The amygdala is firing. Like it's not the time to find the solution.
And that's when typically I find people are being vulnerable. Oh, that's just my vulnerability. Right. That's you having a reaction. You are currently sharing your tantrum with somebody. Totally fine to have a tantrum. It's totally fine to be very emotional. We just don't project our emotions onto our partner because no one makes us feel a certain way. It's, yes, you can have you could do something that I am very triggered by, but that's triggering something in me, you know, and then I get to be vulnerable in that and own it that what you did triggered this thing that was in me before we even met.
Or the thing was alive. The wound was there before I was even on the scene, and I've activated it.
Yeah,
I've exposed it.
Exactly. And it's like, oh, I'm not taking my partner personally. She's just actually exposing some part of me that could be healed if I take the invitation to look.
Do you know, this is such a great conversation because we have spoken at length about self-revealing, and now what I'm realizing is kind of the gap that we've left out. It's like, yeah, you want to self-reveal, you want to expose your inner world to your partner, but I'm not sure if we've really spoken into how that's still not just about, I'm in overwhelm, I'm freaking out, I'm panicked, and it can be like that sometimes, but it's like the best way to actually self-reveal is to have gone away, sat with your stuff, kind of unpacked it, have a bit of a solution, and then you're sharing that with your partner. And I don't know if we've actually highlighted that as a really key part of self-revealing.
Yeah.
Because now couples are in the practice. And they're like, well, I'm sharing all my big feelings, but I'm still feeling like repelled by my partner. It's like, potentially that's why.
Yeah. Yeah. There's options here. That's what you're speaking to, right? It's just like, these are the things that I feel like could be the solution. This is what is actually going on for me. Yeah, absolutely. Because there's so many options that we have when we're in overwhelm to look at if we're willing to, you know. So I think we've spoken to it from a man's point of view, where it's like sharing his vulnerability is like, we don't want to be just emotional. We want to share what's really alive for us in a way that's understood by our partner. I think that's really important to understand. And I think for women, in my experience, what I experience globally for women is women are very expressive. So often at times for men, it's like we kind of have to look past the big feeling and really like see the core of it.
I think it's that you have to not look past the big feeling. You have to look past all the story and the data and what's
being said,
and look for the big feeling. It's like underneath all that's being shared, all this narrative and story,
right.
What actually is the big feeling? Because that's more the deeper truth. But it's like, if you can't have a line of inquiry with yourself, if you're not understanding your own emotional world, then you're not going to be able to understand your partner's, which is why when it comes to doing this work as a couple, it still starts with your own internal work and the self-regulation piece.
Yeah, that's so true, hey, because if we're in the line of inquiry for ourselves around like our needs and our boundaries and our attachment and all the things that we learn, it's kind of like, oh, I can so see what that's like for the other, you know, like I can really see that when you're sharing something. It's like, you're not actually mad. You're not actually mad at me. It's like, oh, when I think you're mad, you're actually fearful, you know, or you have something else going on. It's like, yeah, we can go that little bit deeper with each other.
Well, this is why, like, if we have hit a trigger and then we do take space to go and like be with ourselves, I don't take space to go and like really unpack what's happening for Lindsay. It's all about what's happening for me. It's like, I notice that this is what has set me off, but what am I making it mean? What am I making it mean? What am I making it mean? Like, what is the deepest level of that? Because that's what I'm curious about, and that's what I want you to be doing in your space that you're taking. And then we come and we get to share that. It's like, oh, that fear of abandonment I have just hit up against I can't get it right. And those little old parts of us were activated and playing out. Cool. How can we do it different?
Yeah, and I guess that is the way to share healthy, like how to be healthy in relationship when it comes to self-revealing and letting each other in, because vulnerability to me is such an important component, but it's not a blanket. It's like specific vulnerability as far as like letting you in to see the parts of me that
I think
are
if
sensitive.
we were going to operationalize vulnerability, it's ownership and self-responsibility and like self-accountability. Like that's an authenticity. Like that's what vulnerability is. Like it's really owning what's happening for you without making somebody else wrong for it.
Yeah,
even if they have triggered it, it's still our own stuff.
Yeah, and I think that then ties into, if we do that enough in relationship and it feels safe and respect and trusting, like that fertile ground in relationship, it then creates things around agreements and around boundaries and around values as well. You know, it's like all those things then happen as a follow-on from us being healthy and in our vulnerability with each other. Like it actually brings us closer together. Our vulnerability shouldn't expose us in a way that has us lose trust and respect for each other. It's like vulnerability is seeing the human in the other, such that we're like, oh, I like you even more now.
I think that's a really good way to distinguish like healthy vulnerability. Like how do you know it's healthy vulnerability? Because it actually brings you closer together. It actually moves the needle towards healing and growth and more connection rather than separation.
And I think I've got a name then. What stops healthy vulnerability often is guilt, shame, not wanting to be a burden. There's things that I hear in couples where it's like, oh, I didn't want to share that. I didn't want to be vulnerable with my partner because I felt like it might be too much or too much of a risk, and that leads to withholding the truth. And over time it's like, and I've said this the last couple of months to people, is I'd rather hurt you with the truth than hurt you with lies. And the same thing goes. And vulnerability to me as a man is honesty. So it's like, I need to be honest with myself, and I definitely need to be honest in my relationship and with my partner about what's really alive for me and what's really going on. Because otherwise, you're getting a version of me, but you're not getting the real version of me. And that to me takes up a lot of bandwidth and toll as far as like, yeah, being honest, telling the truth, being able to relax into my relationship means that our intimacy then is very clean and everything else is happening.
I honestly feel like I wouldn't even be available for intimacy if we were putting on this front with one another. Because I'm so sensitive, I can feel when there's something in the way, which means my body's not open and receptive. So it's like having this healthy vulnerability that we're in the practice of, it's kind of a foundation for me to even be a yes to intimacy.
Yeah.
You know, otherwise I'd be operating on top of I can feel something's not quite right here. And so...
Yeah, is there anything for you that you want to speak into as far as like what stops vulnerability, maybe from a woman's perspective?
Well, one of the collective beliefs I think that women carry is I am too much. So I think sometimes a woman, and this is what I actually just hear women tell me this all the time, it's like they feel like they are too much for their partner, they're too emotional, they're too sensitive, and it's just continuing to just bring that forward. And they have so much evidence that when they bring it forward, because they're not actually doing it in the way that we've described as healthy,
right,
they just bring it forward and they don't have the skills to reveal it, and their partner doesn't have the skills to hold it. So they have so much evidence that they are too much. They have this deep belief that I'm too much, but they can, because of the way they share and because of the way they do relationship, they do gather the data that tells them, oh, well, I am too much. So I just can't. It doesn't go well.
Yeah, okay, I hear that. So it's like they're being very expressive and their partner doesn't know how to hold that, or they do it for such a long amount of time in one go that it kind of, the man can't hold it for long enough either. Is that what you mean as well?
Yeah, and also that they'll share and nothing changes. It's just like, and I hear that for men and women.
Yeah.
It's like I've tried to share, but it doesn't make a difference. So eventually we just like heart closes, heart closes, heart closes. There's like a giving up.
Water under the bridge.
There's so much water under the bridge, there's resentment, and it's just, yeah, couples get into this system with each other where they just have so much evidence that being vulnerable doesn't get them anywhere. But that is because they're not being vulnerable in the way that we speak about vulnerability, which is ownership and self-responsibility.
Yeah, skills of relationship.
I just also want to mention, because we've had this question come up recently around a woman feeling repelled when her masculine partner is sharing his overwhelm or his sensitivity or his panic or his tears. And so I think we have covered that without really addressing that specific question, but it's like if your partner is being vulnerable and it is bringing something up in you, it's less about them. Like there's something like maybe the way they're sharing needs to be like tweaked and there can be some more skill to it. But it's like we always want to look at what is being brought up inside of myself. What am I making this mean? And what am I doing to work with, like to heal those parts that are being activated? Why can't I be with my partner's vulnerability?
And I guess, do you want me to answer that? Because I'm happy to like give a few different
I'd love
looks.
for you to answer how, I think maybe you have, if you have, but how a masculine partner could share that would feel really safe for his feminine partner, and in what ways a masculine partner would share that really would repel a more feminine partner.
Yeah, well, I think a man sharing his emotions too much in relationship means that he's not regulated. And so what I know to be true is if a man does that consistently with his feminine partner, it creates a level of distrust or unsafety that he hasn't got himself, so she has to have him. And that puts her in her masculine, which typically then creates a dynamic where she doesn't quite feel safe. And to me, that's the fertile ground of relationships: safety, trust, respect. So if her safety around him or respect around him starts to dwindle because of his emotional vulnerability or volatility, because it's not held, that creates the unsafety.
And I think, and of course, there's so many different dynamics of relationship that people want to have. But if you want that more like masculine, feminine dynamic,
yeah.
I know that a desire for the feminine is to be held by her partner, to feel like he can contain her, like he is there to be the protector, to provide in the way that he can. And so if he is wobbling, and I don't mean that he can't wobble occasionally, like it's not that, but if he's always wobbling and in his own emotional chaos, exactly like you're saying, it's like, I don't feel like you're really here to contain me.
Yeah, well, it's just knowing that, like, a man is welcome to have that in his life where he gets rocked or rattled.
Yes.
But just know that it's like, you're probably not building polarity or intimacy in the relationship for doing it over a long period of time. Your relationship might hold that container of you being or going through something that's very emotional, but it does take a toll, So it's like, if it's not a permanent thing, like if you're crying every week, there might be something that you need to self-regulate and learn the skills of how to meet your own needs, because it's my opinion as a psychotherapist that we do need to learn how to be not just self-sufficient in a way that's like, I don't need a partner ever, but it's like, I have to be able to manage myself and be able to self-regulate myself to a certain extent such that I can be healthy in relationship. Because otherwise I am actually then codependent with my relationship and with my partner, because I need them to fix it for me. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that's ultimately healthy.
I think that would breed resentment inside of a feminine oriented partner. It's just like over time, it's like, I want to say like her pussy's going to close, her womb's going to shut up shop. It's like, you don't want to have sex with that, because he's no longer a man in your eyes. You're then having to be the mother. Yeah,
it's a boy. It's a boy aspect of us. Now, I will say that if you get into a relationship with someone that's like that and they heal it with you, because you do meet it for a moment and it then heals and then he's got himself, great. Like I definitely see that relationship can be for growth and can heal.
Yes.
Absolutely. It's when it's constant. So it's just then that becomes a point of like contention in the relationship where maybe agreements or boundaries need to be put in place to make it work and functioning. But I honestly believe that there's spaciousness for it as long as it's set up powerfully, And
I feel like you answered that question, both of my questions, really beautifully then.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we've covered a lot of details in this. I didn't know how long this podcast was going to go for, but I really liked it.
The highlight is just like self-revealing actually is quite nuanced. And again, it'll always fall on the foundations of both individuals having the capacity for self-regulation and self-inquiry, having themselves. And it's really supportive for men to be in men's work, have a men's group. It's really supportive for women to sit with women. It's like therapy is not just for broken people. We have our therapists, we have blind spots. It's like getting support so that you can function, not just surviving in relationship, but actually like, we are thriving. This is epic. We're growing together.
Yeah, and that vulnerability, healthy vulnerability in relationship creates so much clarity and connection. Like I only said that before. It's like conflict creates clarity, and that's what kind of self-revealing and being vulnerable is sometimes. It's like it sets the stage for deeper connection. It's like, oh, if I'm in the belief that when I'm vulnerable and I do it in a healthy way, you get to see me more. It's like, oh, we're more in love. We're more connected.
I've had that experience with you. I've gathered over the last 2.5 years so much evidence of what it means for me and what it means for partnership to show up in this way. It's like, oh. And as you gather more and more evidence, this stuff gets easier and easier.
Yeah.
Not only are the neural pathways forming just from practice, but you're like, oh my God, this actually works. It actually works. So it does get easier. And it is a practice, and you will fall down and you just keep coming back to it.
And if you're really interested in learning how to do that, if you are in relationship, or even if you've been together for 17 years or 7 weeks, I would highly recommend reaching out to us around our program with Embodied Union, and that's on Instagram at Embodied Union. And I predominantly work with men one-on-one, so that's Lindsay B on Instagram.
I work with women, do group programs and private therapy sessions. I am Charlie S. Hannah. You can find us through the podcast. I think that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you, my love.
My pleasure. Now, if you are still listening and you are interested in a November 4th masterclass with me, I'm going to be running the Relationship Breakthrough Blueprint. And that's going to be a masterclass on how to set up a relationship. I'm also going to give you some really poignant skills on how to repair in relationship. And that is going to be on Zoom online. So if you're interested in that and you want to reach out, I would love to have you there.
And Lindsay has already run this before and the feedback was freaking phenomenal. It's such a good, like, every human needs to come and sit and like absorb your wisdom and your gold.
Thanks, my love.
I love you.
Love
Thanks
you,
for
Critter.
sharing.